right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here. It's really great to see so many people turning out to talk about the Roadless Rule. My name is Tori Anderson, and I'm a facilitator with Confluence Decisions. I'm based in Missoula. My goal tonight is to make sure this is an informative and civil evening with opportunity for you all to learn from each other and share your own experiences and feedback. This presentation is being recorded tonight by Missoula Community Access Television as part of a media assistance grant donated by MPAC. We are here tonight to discuss the future of the Roadless Rule in the management of national forests. This rule has been in place since 2001. It limits road construction and timber harvest in certain areas of national forest, while still allowing for a wide range of management activities, including wildfire suppression, habitat restoration, recreation management, and certain forest health treatments. This rule is designed to preserve the natural integrity of these areas, maintaining their ecological and recreational value. By doing so, it safeguards clean water, wildlife habitat, and outdoor recreation opportunities that are essential to Montana's way of life. Nationwide, the Roadless Rule safeguards about 58 million acres. Here in Montana, it protects around 6 million acres, or about a third of our total Forest Service land. The Bitterroot National Forest contains 410,000 acres of inventoried roadless areas, and I encourage you to read through your handouts you received on the way in for more information about how the Roadless Rule impacts management on the Bitterroot. As these numbers demonstrate, this is a rule with enormous impact. Given this impact, it's especially important that the Forest Service understands how this potential action could impact Montanans' everyday lives. Yet, since the Forest Service announced this past summer their plan to rescind the Roadless Rule, they have not yet held a single public meeting on the topic. To address this, several groups have come together to create an opportunity for you all to provide feedback. These groups include, they're up on the screen here, Wild Montana, Business for Montana's Outdoors, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, Trout Unlimited, Montana Backcountry Horsemen, the Wilderness Society, Montana Wildlife Federation, Mountain Mamas, National Parks Conservation Association, the Sierra Club, and Montana Audubon. So thank you to those groups. Our plan for tonight is to start off with our panelist presentations. We have 3 speakers here who have generously agreed to share their knowledge and experience from several years working on Roadless Rule related issues to share that with you all tonight. So thank you to them for that. The rest of the meeting, we will have time for public comment. These will be 2-minute public comments, and they will be transcribed. Tonight we have a court reporter here in addition to MCAT, who's capturing everything you say, and that transcription will be submitted by our organizing partners during the upcoming comment period for the draft environmental impact statement that the Forest Service is currently preparing. We expect that to be released probably late March, early April, so that will be sent to them at that time. All right, so we will now begin the panelist presentations. If we could have our 3 panelists tonight come up to their chairs. Thank you. I will introduce each of them one by one as we go. So first up tonight, we have Brian Riggers. Brian grew up on a farm in Idaho and moved to Montana 35 years ago to work on the Lolo National Forest. He was a fisheries biologist and fisheries program manager on the forest for 20 years and was the roadless coordinator for Montana and Idaho in the regional office for most of the rest of his career. He led the development of the Montana Bull Trout Conservation Strategy and coordinated planning and implementation of all activities of inventoried roadless areas on over 15 million acres of Forest Service land. He loves to hunt and fish in Montana and has 2 daughters who he hopes have the same opportunities to enjoy wild places that he has had. Let's welcome Brian.
Well, thanks for giving me an opportunity to come up and speak with you tonight. I want to talk a little bit about the history of the Roadless Rule and how it came about, and I want to focus most of my talk on the issues that are currently cited for why the rules should be rescinded. So, briefly, the Wilderness Act of 1964 protected about 10 million acres from what at that time was sort of seen as rapid development and industrialization of forested lands that weren't roaded at that time. In the early 1970s, there was this effort called Rare One, which looked at all the remaining roadless areas in the United States. In the late 1970s, Rare Two came about. Those basically cataloged the roadless areas. And then in the late 90s, the administration looked at protecting the remaining roadless areas, and that's how the Roadless Rule came about. At that time, there was broad public support for the Roadless Rule. There was about 1.6 million comments, and over 90% of those were in support of the rule. It's interesting to note that opposition to the rule at that time came mostly from Western governors and elected officials and heads of agencies. Most of the people that commented just generally as citizens commented in support of the rule. It was created to address 3 main issues. One was the controversy that existed for 4 or 5 decades over when projects were planned in roadless areas. The public was generally not comfortable with that, so there was a bunch of controversy that made for really inefficient project planning and project development. Number 2 was there was an existing backlog of road maintenance that the Forest Service couldn't get to because the funding wasn't there to take care of the almost 500,000 miles of road that existed in the forest already. And the third one was to protect the roadless area characteristics and values that exist in those areas. In December of this year, I want to move on now into the talk about the issues that are cited for reasons to repeal the rule. In December of this year, the Deputy Chief of the Forest Service, Chris French, testified to Congress about the main reasons why he felt the Forest Service should be in support of rescinding the rule. And those were, 1, that management of IRAs is inefficient under the rule, 2, that projects in IRAs are not economical, and 3, that we need to have decisions made at the local level. Worth noting that these same 3 issues were brought up and addressed in significant detail in 2001 when the rule was developed. And so it's not the first time these issues have been talked about. So I want to talk about each of those. First one is efficiency. The premise that the Roadless Rule makes managing roadless areas inefficient is simply not true. As I said earlier, there was 4 or 5 decades of controversy over managing undeveloped areas prior to the development of the rule. Every time the Forest Service proposed a project in those areas, it would get met with public objections. The rule, since it was developed, has been very successful in terms of reducing that controversy, and it gives the public certainty of what's expected in those areas over the long term. So it's been, in my opinion, one of the best broad-scale rules that the Forest Service has had. It's interesting that since we've had the rule, it takes a while for a large thing like this to get into play. So not a lot of projects happen in roadless areas for the first 10 years, but since 2010, the amount of projects, what we're talking about mostly is fuel reduction projects. The amount of projects that happen in roadless areas is essentially the same as the amount of projects on a per acre basis that happen outside of roadless areas. So once the Forest Service got used to working within the boundaries of the rule, it works really well. And most people that I work with in the Forest Service at the resource professional level broadly support the rule. That's important for folks that don't work in there every day to know. Under the economics topic, you all know it takes a lot of money to build roads, and it takes money to harvest trees, especially fuel reduction projects where the trees are small. You don't make money off that. It costs money to cut those trees and get them out of the forest. The way to change that is to build more roads so that you don't have to drag trees as far. You can make landings in closer areas to the units, and to harvest more trees and bigger trees. And that's the way, projects are managed on places outside of roadless areas. And so even in those areas, it's tough to make projects in Montana make sense, unless you go to the northwest corner of the state. But in this part of the country, it's tough to make it economical. The idea that we're going to have economical projects in these areas without a roadless rule doesn't hold a lot of water. We can make projects more economical, but they're going to look like projects outside of roadless areas. And one of the important things to note about that is there's been a lot of science since the early 90s about effects of management activity, road construction, and timber harvest on forested lands, and nearly all of that science shows that in places that are managed that way, where we look at economics, try to make more roads, bigger harvest units, make it economical, generally things are not in as good a shape. All the things, from wildlife habitat to fisheries to clean water to air quality to soils, recreation, every resource aspect you can look at is of a lower quality in those areas than in unroaded areas. And so that, again, goes back to the need to have these roadless areas conserved. And finally, the last point is on local decision making. This, again, was addressed thoroughly in the 2001 process leading up to the rule. And that analysis showed that protecting unroaded areas was an issue that couldn't be relied upon to be done at the local level. Simply put, the numerous pressures and desires for use of national forest lands and the reliance on local decision makers' individual perspectives without adequate context would likely result in continued loss of undeveloped landscapes over time. So the problem with that is when you're looking at a small planning area, and Bitterroot National Forest is a big place, but in context of the nation, it's a small place. And when you're looking at that, you can often overlook the importance of these roadless areas scattered across the landscape, and you gradually lose them, and then we don't have that context. It's ironic that a lot of people pushing for this rescission of the rule are the same people who, they say that we need local decision making. They're the same people who supported removing roughly 30% of Forest Service employees at the local decision making level in the past few years. So those people aren't there now. They're people, but a lot of those people are distant. A lot of people haven't had a lot of tenure in these places. And so local decision making is a little bit more difficult, not saying it can't be done. But the other issue with that is the people that are pushing for this aren't people in our local communities. It's generally, again, those Western governors, other elected officials, and heads of agencies that are pushing for this. People like the Chief of the Forest Service, who, again, it should be somebody you can rely on to represent what the Forest Service people and the communities want. But these people are not local people. They're in Washington saying what we should be doing and saying, we want you guys to make the decisions when they're the ones pushing this decision. And I think that's a bit ironic. So to me, that those three things are important to know because they sort of set the context for, well, what should we do about that? Is there anything we can do? And is that the last one? Okay. So when I've been thinking about this, I sit here and I'm thinking, well, what can I do about this? Because it seems like so many of these decisions are sort of out of our hands. The proposal's made, this decision was made before the proposal was made. But I think there are things we can do. We can write emails, we can make phone calls to our elected officials. Every one of us in here can do that. We can urge, and I think this is a really important thing, we can talk to our friends and we can urge them to vote against the people that support this sort of thing. And one thing we can do, my experience being the roadless coordinator, one thing I noticed is not a lot of people really know much about IRAs, inventory roadless areas. They don't know when they're out recreating in the forest that this beautiful place is beautiful because it's a roadless area. So we can talk to them about that. We can explain, this is why this is roadless. These are the people that want to get rid of it, and your chance to make a difference is to vote against that. So you can make your vote maybe count for 5 votes. Everybody in here influence 5 of your friends to vote, that way. It'll make a huge difference. We can also, be active on social networking things. We can do marches, protests at local Forest Service district offices. The point is to just get our voices heard so people can't ignore us. So the people that are supposed to be representing us actually have to represent us because we won't back down. And so I think it's important to do that. And I encourage you all to do that when you're, after we leave here tonight, and remind those people that are supposed to be representing this that it's the public land and it's our land and it's our decision. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Brian. Next up, we have Steve Schmidt. Steve is a retired Idaho Fish and Game Regional Supervisor, now living outside Darby, Montana. Steve was a supervisor for the Upper Snake and Salmon regions. He also served a term as chair of the Yellowstone Interagency Grizzly Bear Subcommittee. He was chair of the Eastern Idaho Aspen Working Group and founding member of the Upper Snake Sagegrass Working Group. Steve is a certified public manager. In Montana, currently Steve serves on the Ravalli County Collaborative, which he also chaired for several years. Let's welcome Steve.
Thank you all for your participation tonight. As a retired wildlife biologist by trade, I would like to speak to you a little bit about the impact of roads on wildlife and on recreation. When I think of inventory roadless areas, I greatly value that they are relatively undisturbed big chunks of wildlife habitat. However, when road densities get too high, those roads can severely impact wildlife and their habitat. For example, elk and deer reproductive success drops when calving and fawning areas are disturbed by motorized activity. That's why we have some areas in the Bitterroot National Forest that are closed during the calving and fawning season. We also have areas that, and roadless areas where big game are wintering. And it's very important that those wintering animals are not disturbed during the winter months. Are you familiar with when most big game die from starvation? It typically happens at the end of winter and early spring. And that's because the animals essentially run out of gas. And if they're right on the edge, it's March, right on the edge, and they're just about out of gas, and motorized vehicles come through, and now they have to run for a mile or so to get away from the motorized vehicles, that may be all it takes. That may be all it takes, and they tip over and they die. So it's very important to keep those wintering areas free from those kinds of disturbances. Motorized roads can be a vector for introducing invasive plants into our healthy forest ecosystems. They can increase sedimentation that puts silt into our trout streams and clogs up spawning gravel. But even if those issues were adequately addressed, too many roads decrease what wildlife managers call big game security or elk habitat effectiveness. You may have heard either one of those terms. And what that means is if elk in particular are too easy to hunt and kill, then wildlife managers, Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, has to reduce hunting opportunity. If you know you can only allow for 20 big bulls to be killed each year, and they're as easy to shoot as shooting them off somebody's pasture, and you know that all 20 of your tags are going to be filled, you can only offer 20 tags. If we want to allow for more hunting opportunity and allow people to hunt more than once every 10 years, we have to think about refuges where some of the animals can get away and survive till next year. That's elk security. And it's important. And inventory roadless areas help provide big game security. Inventory roadless areas also provide very important migration corridors as our big game and other wildlife move back and forth from one type of habitat to another, from their summer ranges to their winter ranges and back and forth. So in my career, I was often asked by people, what does a regional supervisor do? And I jokingly said, well, I'm head of the complaint department. And that was more true than I'd like to admit. But over my years of working for the state of Idaho Fish and Game Department, I've been asked by many hunters questions about access and where the animals are, and I've fielded many complaints. And many of those complaints had to do with either you guys are selling tags for animals that don't even exist, or you're selling tags for an area we can't even get into because the Forest Service has locked us out. Well, there's a good rule of thumb to remember when you're thinking about roaded access and whether the amount of roaded access is appropriate or not. And the rule of thumb is that through research we know that elk are going to try to stay at least a half mile away from a busy motorized road. Yeah, they'll run across the road in front of you once in a while. You might get lucky. But generally speaking, big game, elk in particular, bears in particular, they're going to avoid roads. They're going to be at least a half mile away. And they're also only going to really thrive and be abundant in areas where you have chunks of at least 250 acres that are unroaded. If you have so many roads on the hillside, and you've seen this, the roads just zigzag back and forth up and down the sides of the hill, and there's no big chunks of 250 acres or more, odds are there are not going to be any elk there. They're going to go somewhere else. And hunters are going to get mad and they're going to complain that there aren't any elk. Yet that's not true. There are elk out there, but they've just moved out because of so many roads. I've also talked to a lot of non-resident hunters who've come to Idaho and Montana wanting to hunt big game, and they're excited. They drew a controlled hunt tag, and now that they're coming up for their big hunt. And I specifically remember guys from Texas wanting to come up to Idaho to hunt. Amazingly, a lot of those guys hauled their horses all the way from Texas to Idaho to hunt. They have big investment in their hunt. And wisely, they would call our office to look for some hunting advice. And they'd ask me, well, help me get started here. Where should I go? And this is what I would tell them. I would say, first, get a hold of the forest visitor map, the green map that many of you have in your vehicles in your possession. Second, get a hold of the forest motorized vehicle use map that shows you what trails and what roads are open and which ones are closed. And then I said, find on the visitor map and the motorized vehicle use map roads that will get you fairly high up on the range, because that's where your elk are going to be. They're going to be high up on the range. And look for an area where there's a road here and a road here, but in between there's a big chunk where there's no roads. That's probably where the elk are going to be. And if it's an area that's been burned in the last few years, even better, because those animals are going to pile into those unroaded areas where there's lots of groceries, and they're going to have that elk security that I talked about, where some of them can find a refuge. And so I use roads, and of course every time I've killed a big game animal, first thing I want to know is how am I going to get it out of here, right? So I've got to have those maps with me. But I've always been a foot soldier, and I've found that if I can get away from the road, that's more likely where the animals are going to be. Now, one of the misconceptions is that about roadless areas is that no forest management takes place in inventoried roadless areas. Well, that's very far from the truth. The basics of the inventory roadless rule are that only two things are really prohibited. You can't build any new roads, you can't have commercial timber harvest, but you can have a lot of forest management that takes place on roadless areas, one of which is the prescribed burning that we see. Every time I see the Forest Service burning, and I see the smoke clouds, I'm thankful for the work that those guys are doing. They're reducing those fuel loads that are so important. But they also can get in there with lots of equipment and work to thin those forests, make them more healthy, address disease problems, and reduce the potential for catastrophic wildfire. And the roadless rule allows for a lot of equipment to be used in roadless areas that most people don't think of, and I have a list here. Small or medium tracked wheeled bunchers. I'm not a timber guy, but a big piece of equipment to haul the dead trees out. Skidders, forwarders, mini excavators, small dozers, but you can't use those for road building. Chippers, masticators, ATV and UTV mounted implements, chainsaws, brush saws, portable winches. Helicopter yarding is allowed. So there's a lot of management that is taking place, and I work with the Forest Service on projects to do that very thing. In a nutshell, I want to say that I view roadless areas kind of like a savings account that only increases in value year after year. Roadless areas are a hedge against the future, against an unknown future. Are we going to need more recreation areas in the future? Very likely. Do we need any more roads? I don't think so. I think we have a variety of opportunities in the forest right now. If you want to go hunt from the road, there's lots of places to do that. But I think for the benefit of the wildlife and for future recreation, for the benefit of maintaining some healthy ecosystems, roadless areas are a good choice. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. All right, last up we have Mark Oswald. Mark was raised in a small logging community in the Central Sierra, and his playgrounds were the forest there. He even honeymooned in the wilderness. Although not designated roadless, his roaming was done in roadless river canyons for the solitude. Mark is the president of the Ravalli County Fish and Wildlife Association, the oldest conservation organization in the state, established in 1908. He has spent 43 years in the fire service, 35 of those professionally in a rural fire district. The fire district went from 2,000 feet elevation to 9,000 feet in the central Sierra Nevada, very similar to the environment of Ravalli County. Mark has also done fire ecology work under Dr. Harold Biswell at UC Berkeley in the pilot prescriptive fire program of the California State Parks. And he worked in the sequoia redwoods of the Sierra. So Mark has worked on both sides of the fire line. Mark has been a hunter safety instructor for 40 plus years. For 10 years, he was the California trout stream keeper for the North Fork Stanislaus River. Let's welcome Mark.
Thank you, everyone. I'm pleased to be here. First of all, I'm not a public speaker. Second of all, I'm not a scientist or an expert on anything, but I sure hung out with a lot of those folks, long in the tooth. And so I've seen a lot of stuff out in the woods and seen what happens when we interfere with nature and start building stuff. Mostly I want to talk about the watershed up in our Blue Joint area above the Painted Rock Reservoir. That particular watershed, if you're not familiar with it, houses, it's a ton of area up there. Jason Lindstrom, our local FWP fisheries biologist, 2 months ago in a presentation to the Trout Unlimited, told that watershed up there is one of very few areas where there is pure strain West Slope cutthroat trout, of course bull trout in there. Without having good quality water, those fish wouldn't be there. They wouldn't last. And why is that water so good up there? Well, those roadless areas act like a biofilter for the water. They keep it clean. They keep it cold. They sequester the water into the water table and allow for our springs to keep those creeks being and cold. When you start putting roads in, you get a lot of siltation. Along with that, oftentimes the road construction alters the stream beds, so that changes the whole physical structure of the stream. And then also with things like culverts that will prevent migration of these fish. You can't make that jump in many of these older culverted roads. Modern roads, of course, they try to mitigate that, but the roads that we have around here, most of those were built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. They're out in the forest right now, and so they're antiquated from that standpoint. There's also dust and other pollutants from road usage. As I think it was in the newspaper recently that a car traveling on a dirt road or a gravel road in our area for 1 year creates somewhere in the order of 1 ton of dust annually per vehicle. Well, you multiply that by however many folks are out there in the woods, it's going to add up. Then there's also oil spills and fuel spills and that sort of thing. One of the ways to improve the watersheds is through forest management, primarily burning. And I'm talking about good fire, not bad fire. And when I define good fire, that's a low intensity fire that burns primarily the forest floor debris and then the low brush and eliminates a lot of the fire matter. So I'm going to back up a little bit. Before the Europeans got to North America, our fires were pretty prevalent in our forest, especially with our ponderosa forest, that they burned on average between every 10 and every 20 years. Some of those were human caused. Our Native Americans realized that good management for wildlife, quite frankly, was by renewing the resources through fire. And then, of course, there was the natural fires. And because of the frequency of those fires, the fire intensity was very low. Normally, fire height was about 2 to 3 foot, or not more than that. Occasionally, there would be a run. They would run up a drainage or something like that. And they would, every once in a while, there would be a tree that would torch. But for the most part, it was low intensity. Then came the Europeans, and about 100 years ago, we got a policy on the forest that said all the fires are going to be put out before 10 a.m. Well, that worked pretty good for a while, but as the forest fuels built up, and keep in mind that the ponderosa forest will drop somewhere between 5 and 10 tons of fuel on the forest floor annually. So in that 100 years that we've been sitting here, you can do the math real fast, there's plenty of fuel out there. We don't have a lot of rot around here either. In other words, the decomposition of those forest fuels is very slow here. Our winters are cold, you don't get decomposition, and then our summers are too dry. So there's a very short window where we get this, the rot, if you will, in our spring and fall. So those fuels accumulate. And because we've occluded fire for 100 years, not only are the fuels excessive, but our vegetation has crowded out everything. All the browse is rank, the animals can't use it, it's no good for, the groceries aren't there. The timber stands are too thick. Dr. Biswell, who I worked with in the early 70s, used to call that a biological slum. Well, Mother Nature likes to clean that out, and the best way to do it, and we can help do that, is through the use of smart fire, good fire, low intensity fire. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of that going on right now, and so these biological slums have got a lot of heat in them and they take off, and then we have our catastrophic fires. And the reason I bring that up is because most of these fires that we call catastrophic are caused by humans. And most of them are ignited within a half a mile of a road. So if you don't have those roads, you're not going to have those catastrophic fires. So switching gears a little bit. With low intensity fire, the fire burns out, cleans up the forest floor, reduces those fuels. It prepares a new seed bed where the new growth can come back up, not only the trees, but also the brush species and the intermediate species that come up. Those at that point are very palatable for the animals, and they're great forage for them. And by renewing that periodically every 10 or 15 years, you're going to create good habitat for our wildlife. The other thing that the fire does is it opens up the crown of the forest. It allows for more snow to accumulate on the forest floor, which then creates more absorption into the water table. We have to have some forest to keep that snowpack shaded so that it doesn't run off too fast. By having burning periodically, that we prepare that soil, it makes for better absorption of that water. It slows down the runoff a little bit, and it's just good for our watershed. So that's pretty much what I got. Okay. So anyhow, I'm an advocate of all of the forest management plans and getting out there and thinning a little bit, what they call TSI, timber stand improvement. A lot of our logging that can be done has a very low impact on the ground. It has a low footprint, and it can be done without a lot of damage and without roads. And that's pretty important too, to open up those fuels, reduce the fuels, and open up that forest canopy for everything. I mean, it reduces the chances of fire, makes for better habitat, and so on. I'm pretty much done. I didn't have anything prepared.
Thanks again to our panelists. That was a really helpful way to ground this meeting and help spark an informative comment period coming up next. So you're welcome to go back to your seats now if you want. Great, so going into the comment period, a few notes before we get started. Some ground rules. We're all here tonight to learn, right? To learn from our panelists, to learn from each other. So in that spirit, please be respectful of other people, even if you don't hold their same opinion. At least treat them the way you would want to be treated, so no name calling, focus on the problem rather than the person. I'm sure that won't be an issue. Make space for others. So mostly with this, talking about time, so we are going to hold people to a 2-minute time limit, just because there's so many people in the room and we want to make sure everyone has a chance to speak. So please respect that out of respect for your neighbors. And then the way we're going to do this is please just wait until you're called to speak, and wait till you have the mic. So we'll actually start with forming a line here when it's time, and so it can go more quickly, but just make sure you wait till you have the mic to start speaking so that we can hear you. And in that spirit of being able to hear, we do have a court reporter here transcribing everything you say. So just a reminder, it is going to be submitted in the draft EIS comment period. And with that, we'll need to know your name and where you're from. And if your name is hard to spell, please spell it for our recorder. That would be great. And then ways that you can provide a useful comment. Provide your opinion, of course, but also provide the reason for your opinion, right? How you got to that conclusion, whatever it was, as anecdote, data, whatever it is, speak to that as well. Be specific. We're mostly focused here tonight on the Bitterroot, but you're welcome to speak more generally as well, but specific examples are really helpful. And then be constructive, right? Do you have an alternative to whatever you're talking about? Because that can be really tricky, right? So propose some constructive alternatives maybe. And then yeah, just say your name, that's the last thing. Okay, so I'm just going to leave up this map of the forest. You also have this on your handout. It's kind of hard to read up here, but you're welcome to refer to that. So to kick things off, can you raise your hand if you have a comment that you'd like to start with?
I just have a quick question
Oh, sure, yeah.
for Brian.
Okay.
So if we get 95% comments in favor of keeping the roadless rule, is the Forest Service going to listen to that?
That's for me.
Yes, since you have the Forest Service experience.
I can't guarantee that that would change things, but what I do know is that sort of the fly buzzing around all the time, you know, it makes them have to answer to why they wouldn't do that. So, you know, I think it's pretty hard. I guess I would say it'd be pretty hard to rescind the rule if there were 1.6 million comments that said we support the rule, and then have to get up in front of the public and say this is why we didn't do what 95% of the people wanted us to do.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. Would you like to make a comment?
Well, no,
Yeah.
a general question
Okay.
also. You mentioned that comments collected tonight were going to somehow be submitted. I mean, where does the input to this meeting go?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I'll have more details up on that on the last slide too. If you want to submit a comment after this meeting, you of course can do that on your own, like any member of the public. But anytime there's a rulemaking process like the current one to rescind the roadless rule, they're required to hold a public comment period. So the transcription and the comments you provide tonight on the index cards, those will be collected and submitted by the organizing partners I mentioned earlier during that comment period on the draft environmental impact statement. Does that make sense?
So there definitely is going to be a draft environmental impact statement comment period?
They're required to. That's all I can say.
Are there going to be more public meetings, in other words?
This is not a Forest Service meeting. Hillary, do you want to talk about this?
As one of the organizers and the person who will personally be submitting these transcripts to the Forest Service, there is a comment period that is required, but no, the Forest Service will not be holding any public meetings, which is why we have organized this and the other 6 public meetings in Montana. But yes, there will be another opportunity to comment on the draft document that the Forest Service is currently working on, and we expect that to be available possibly in April, although we don't entirely know what the agency's timeline is.
So this is kind of trying to get comments ready that we know will be submitted.
Yeah.
If we are
And-
too busy in April.
Yeah, and also to help people start thinking about this so that, you know, one of the reasons we had you sign in is so we can contact you and say, this draft of EIS is now available. Here's what it is, here's how to comment on that, and you'll have had some, you know, hopefully this meeting provides some kind of preparation and brainstorming and kind of gets the wheels turning a bit in anticipation of that.
Okay, great, thank you for clarifying. Yeah, this definitely isn't your only chance to comment. You'll have more opportunities. But would anyone like to kick us off in our comment period? Okay, yeah, right there. Yeah, and you're welcome, as you feel like you have a comment you want to say, you're welcome to start lining up right here. Yeah, right here.
I'd like to
And then I've got the triangle, you may have noticed. I will ding that when you have 30 seconds left, and then I'll do it again at 2 minutes, and then I'll start doing it over and over again if you're still talking.
Good evening, my name's Dan Tracy. Thanks for all being here. That's Dan, D-A-N. I'm from Corvallis. I'm also a volunteer with Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. So Bailey, I was going to chat real quick about the benefits that the roadless areas provide, but I don't want to repeat what the panelists to do, so I'll be selfish and say what these things provide to me. So when I see this map that shows all these roadless areas surrounding our home, to me it is the backcountry experience that it provides, and one of the few places left in this earth that we can actually experience solitude. So, without the phones going off all the time, and, as a father of a young child, this is something that if this goes away, they won't be able to provide that to my grandchildren, to their children. So this is a big deal, and I think if we lose sight of that, this is a big turning point, and I think we need to do what we can to protect this. Thank you.
I'm going to know one of those Dans from Corvallis, Dan Mayo. I'd like to start off with a quote from Back to the Future. Roads, where we're going, we don't need roads. I'll keep this brief. I'm against the rescinding the roadless rule. Basically, there's no findings or reasons to support rescinding the rule. Anybody with a 5th grade education or less can get on the internet and do some digging and find out from 1991 to 2001 itself, before the roadless rule, there was a net reduction of the Forest Service discontinuing or closing roads because of several reasons. One of them was the logging companies weren't using them anymore. So with that, my comments are, why no public meetings to rescind the roadless rule prior to the draft environmental impact statement? What data supports rescinding the rule? Again, I haven't seen any data at all. I've seen a lot of comment type stuff that doesn't have any numbers on it. There's no numbers. When did the study begin? Okay, so June something 2025 or July, whatever it was, is when they decided they're going to rescind the rule. But when did that study begin? I mean, when you do a study, you have lots of data to support that. Who conducted this study? Well, the Forest Service, they say, and also I think it was there was another organization, can't remember the name of it. Again, when we start opening these roads, or reopening roads, make new roads or opening old roads, who's going to pay for it? Again, the taxpayer. Now there's some provisions that the Forest Service gets back money. They give back money to the loggers for using this and all this kind of stuff. But basically it's taxpayer responsibility along with a maintenance mechanism on that. That's it. I'm done.
I didn't plan on making a comment, but considering you guys are nice enough to submit these for us, I figured I'd take advantage. My name's Christopher, Kristofer Taylor. Live here in Hamilton. Definitely not an expert on this, but considering the amount of roads that are already out there and the amount of gates that are already out there, the amount of times they're supposed to be open and closed throughout the year, and the times that I've seen where they're not properly opened and closed throughout the year, with the importance of the elk habitat, it just seems like the more roads we add, the more complexity we add, the higher likelihood those gates aren't going to be properly open, closed. There's some inconsistencies in the motor vehicle use map and what's been closed and opened. Also seen plenty of people driving around those gates when they are closed. So it just seems like the more roads we build, the harder the enforcement will be, considering the deficit that already exists with all this. It's just going to keep adding costs for enforcement and a lot of people breaking rules.
right. I made sure to bring my reading glasses tonight because I'm over 50 and you know how it goes. So my name is Brett Haverstick. Last name is spelled Haverstick, Haverstick, and I live in Missoula. So my main focus tonight of being here is to speak on behalf of our native wildlife, and I'd like everyone to picture themselves as a wolverine. There are about 300 wolverines left in the entire lower 48, and the Northern Rockies bioregion is their last stronghold. So 300 left in the entire country outside of Alaska. And now if you want to look at the map, if you focus on the roadless areas on the east side of the forest, specifically look at, let's say you're a wolverine trying to get from the north, let's say in the northern continental divide ecosystem, and trying to get down to the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Let's say you're going to go through some protected roadless areas on the Bitterroot National Forest. Well, on the east side, you might start coming through the Stony Mountain IRA, work your way into the Sapphires, maybe down into Allen Mountain, and then maybe get into that greater Yellowstone ecoregion country. And so when I think of inventoried roadless areas, I think it's important for us to step back and realize that many of these roadless areas are wildlife biological connecting corridors. In many cases, they're umbilical cords for life. And roadless areas are part of a much greater living system, an ecoregion, a bioregion. And so that's why they're so crucial for wildlife, including a species like wolverine, which is probably using these roadless areas on the national forest to connect and find a mate and have babies with so that they can survive into the future, exchange genes. And then I also want to say that I think instead of scrapping the roadless rule, we need to not only keep it on the books, but strengthen it. Am I done? All right. Go wildlife.
Hi there, my name is Michelle Dietrich, and that's spelled D-I-E-T-E-R-I-C-H, one L in Michelle. I'm going to be get an A+ and go less. You don't have to bring your thing. I just want to quickly quote an old song. I believe it was by Joni Mitchell, Tree Paradise. You don't know what you've got until it's gone. If we start building roads and cutting down the mature and old-growth forests that are protected by these roadless areas, and we finally realize that, boy, we made a huge mistake in 2026, it's going to be too late. Thank you for your time.
I am Sue Schmidt from Darby, Montana, SCHMIPT. I just want to thank Mark for talking about the water quality we have here. Now, I grew up in the Midwest. We had oil slicks on our water. It was gross. So we need to protect our watersheds so we have clean, safe, healthy water and protect our animals, protect our way of life. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Michael Wilson. I'm from Florence, Montana, and I'm a retiree of the Forest Service. I worked for 29 years, mostly in western Montana and some in Idaho. Number one, there's a reason why there aren't any more mills in the Bitterroot Valley. Most of you, I'm sure, have hiked the Bitterroots, the east side, you know what's out there. We have taken the best of the trees, and there is a time lag that everybody in the Forest Service knows about to get our major growing sites back to where there's really merchantable timber. Bring that up to the people you talk to and tell them there are better growing sites, and the Bitterroot Valley is not one of them. And also keep in mind the economics of these logging sales that go on. It was brought up at one point. Your taxpayers will go in for the bulk of building these roads. And the economics on these timber sales for the last 30 years that I've been working on the Bitterroot Valley were not in favor of the productivity of the timber that comes out, the taxpayer paid the bulk of the cost of those. Part of my career, I worked on reclaiming roads from Darby Lumber, where they would build roads in areas, and a lot of their areas they would put 4-inch PVC pipe for culverts. And you can imagine it lasted probably the length of the timber sale they were in, and then they were plugged up. So a lot of times, to the Forest Service credit, we did pay a lot of money in rehabbing some of these old roads and close those roads for the very reason that it would be a long, long time before there was merchantable timber in those areas again. So bring up economics.
Hi everybody, I'm McKenna Flanagan from Florence, and I'm happy to hear so many people speaking on behalf of water. I want to add one more voice advocating for water quality. I work in water conservation, and I can tell you that the Bitterroot Valley, this is one of our most precious resources, but also our ground and water resources are already under tremendous strain just from shameful over-allocation of water rights and from drought. We're in a very drought-prone area. We certainly cannot afford the certain increase in sedimentation due to the increase in roads, and this is one of the most powerful protections that we have in place for water quality in the Bitterroot Valley. So we cannot afford to lose that.
Hi, my name is Toddy Perryman. That's T as in telephone, O-D-D-Y, Perryman with a P. About 20 years ago, when they initiated the Roadless Rule, I got up and spoke about how the fact that we have already taken out more than 98% of the trees in this country. It used to be a country covered in forests, covered in wildlands and woodlands, and now it's almost all gone. And these wildlands and woodlands are, as many people pointed out, critical for providing clean air, clean water, and resources for wilderness, for wild animals. And these are all values that we appreciate. And one of the problems with government oversight is they don't actually count the cost of eliminating those benefits. The benefits of clean air and clean water are really never tabulated in the cost of building roads. So the Roadless Rule is critical in protecting wild habitats. And we've got almost none of it left. And as several people pointed out, once it's gone, it is gone. So there's really no benefit to building more roads. They're a cost, not a benefit. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Ethan. I'm here in Hamilton. I wanted to start out by saying we're all probably familiar with the phenomenon of long-term habitat degradation, where we compare a healthy habitat to what we knew as a kid or what our parents told us about. But if you compare that to your grandparents or your great-grandparents and you keep going back, then you know it's even more stark contrast. Comparing now to 50 years ago versus 100 versus 200, 300 years ago. So we're up against a long-term trend of habitat degradation. And so I think that not only would repealing the Roadless Rule accelerate that, but keeping it should be seen as neutral and middle of the road. And actually, if we want a new trajectory of habitat restoration, then it would be decommissioning roads. And I just want to read here. We've got the Forest Service is burdened by a $8.6 billion deferred maintenance backlog, 58% of which is due to dilapidated roads. So that seems like a ripe opportunity to not expand our roads, but rather excavate the slope, upslope, cover those roads, seed them with native plants, and benefit the habitat and prevent that sediment from entering. Really, my larger point here that I am trying to get at is that if we disagree with the roadless rule, then we have a stronger case if we don't just go with the neutral, but we recognize the full opposite of repealing, and that would be to engage in habitat restoration, in this case, decommissioning. So I just want to put that out there. Excuse me, should have drank water. But as an option, as well, just to make that part of the conversation. So thank you.
Hi there, my name is Karen Harvey and I live in the Victor area. And I'm also a former Forest Service wildlife biologist. Worked for about 10 or 11 years up in the Powell Ranger District area on the Idaho side of the Bitterroot Range. I'm in my 70s, so I was actively involved in the rare 2 late 70s designation of roadless areas. So I've had a pretty long history in supporting the roadless areas. They're critical for wildlife habitat. They provide for quality hunting and fishing areas, which are enjoyed by all Montanans here. Roadless areas have become increasingly more important given the proliferation of four-wheelers and UTVs that are on a lot of national forest land that is not roadless. Since the beginning of the roadless area designation planning periods, the government deliberations have already pretty much actively eliminated prime timber producing lands from consideration of being designated roadless areas. The people pushing the rescinding of the roadless area rules are the Washington, D.C. bureaucrats, not the local people that care for and enjoy the roadless areas. For the most part, we local people want the roadless areas to remain in place. Wildlife habitat security and connectivity should be a priority of the management of these roadless areas. And like Steve said, they're not exempted from management operations or projects. When I was over on the Powell Ranger District, we did a very large-scale whitebark pine restoration area that included fire and thinning. So, thank you very much.
My name's Brad Cook. I'm from Hamilton. Cook, spelled C-O-O-K. I'm skeptical. I don't know about, I can't speak for everyone here, but I have noticed that no one's gotten political tonight, but I'm skeptical. I mean, the mere fact that this is an independent comment gathering meeting tells me a whole lot. It tells me that the current administration is not interested in public comment. I mean, if you've been watching the news, you know the rules have changed. And if we continue to follow the same rules, I'm not saying break rules, but I'm saying the game has changed. This administration is not interested in what we have to say. They're not interested in water quality. They're not interested in a few people in a very large state, but very sparsely populated, that truly understand what the value of this land is. They're not interested. These bureaucrats in Washington are appointees. And they will do, as you've seen in the media, exactly what the big guy has to say. So I've called, written letters to our senators and representatives and have seen absolutely no interest in anything that I've had to say. The rules have changed. The next thing that I can only offer you right now is that on March 28th, from 11 to 1, there'll be a rally in Hamilton for a No Kings rally, and another one in Missoula from 1 to 3, I think, on the same day, March 28th. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dale Brodzeit. That's B as in boy, R-O-S-Z-E-I-T. This is Cora. We hike. A number of years ago, my husband and I volunteered at Malheur National Wildlife Refuge in Oregon. There was a lot of anger. You've heard of the Bundys. About timber, about jobs, about the mills that closed. I was very surprised because over the years I've heard about tree huggers and spotted owls. It turns out that the timber industry folk had calculated pretty much to the year when the timber was going to run out. The huge mill was initially set up to deal with huge trees. And then they cut all those down, so they had to downsize the saws. And then they took out all those trees. And then the mill shut down. So I'm hearing here that, oh my gosh, there's jobs, there's mills, we gotta reopen the mills. We cut the trees, and the trees here don't grow as fast as they do, say, in Western Washington, where there's a lot of rain. So they keep saying we gotta open these roads. We gotta get that timber. I hike, and there's some wonderful trees, but I don't think it's enough to open mills again. And I think the folks who are doing timber, I think they know pretty much to the board foot what's out there, and it's not enough to warrant the talk and the plans that they have to open. I would like to see the roadless areas stay roadless. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Diane Olheft from Corvallis, O-L-H-O-E-F-T. I've lived in Montana since '81, but I grew up in Pennsylvania, and it was the land of orange creeks and houses collapsing into mine shafts and what slides of rocks. And we do a lot of hiking and camping with our llamas. We have a ranch that is borderline running out of water at times, and I think it's really important that we keep these roadless areas pristine for our water, for our wildlife, and so it can be easy access to more mines.
Hi all, my name is Karen Miskey. I'm the chapter director for Montana Sierra Club. We're one of the co-sponsors this evening. I have one thought and one announcement. I hear the skepticism in the room. I understand that a lot of you may think that the Forest Service won't hear us, that the Trump administration won't hear us. And what I will offer is this summer, we showed what our voices can do. The big ugly bill wanted to sell off our public lands, and we raised our voices and we brought it to a stop. We can stand up, we can make change. I'm not saying it's easy, but we can do it. The second thing, and bear with me for one moment, this is off topic. I just wanted to make an announcement. Tomorrow in Missoula at 405 University Avenue, we are having a Sheep Creek meeting to energize the Missoula folks to stand next to the Ravalli folks and fight Sheep Creek Mine. So I would really like as many of you as possible to be there. I think it's great for folks to hear from those most directly affected. Yes, the Clark Fork will be affected, but you guys are on the front lines. So for as many of you that can make it, we would greatly appreciate that. Thank you.
Where it is?
It is 6:30 p.m. at the UCC, which is 405 University Avenue.
University Center?
No, it's actually at a church. So it is in the university district, but it's not at the U itself. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Hi, my name's Colleen Albert, and I'm from Stevensville. No Sheep Creek Mine, for number one. Bring that up. I've worked in the forestry business my whole life. I've been on the roads. I've driven everywhere you can possibly go. And I use them for biking and hiking and cross-country skiing and all of that. But I'm a wild animal, and I need wild places. I need to go where there is no sound, where I can look up and see stars and not see pollution, where I don't hear a snowmobile and I don't hear a motorbike. Even though all that stuff is so great, I need to keep myself wild. We need to keep the roadless places wild. So important. Some people like the noise. All of you people, I'm sure, are with me. We're here because we like the wild places. It's where our heart is free and where we feel peace, where we can find ourselves, where we can remember who we really are, where we come back out and we share with our community all the goodness that we have as human beings. And so it's just so valuable, so much more than money and power and all the other BS that the people against all this stand for. We just need to be louder. We need to be stronger to protect these places. Thank you.
I'm back. Mark Oswald, Hamilton. That's OSWALD. Just a comment on commenting. One of our local politicians told me recently that there's, if you write a letter to them, they can't delete it if you do it on paper. And if you put enough paper out there and they start tripping on it, they're going to start taking a notice to it. So, you know, all these masks, easy to do. Emails are all fine and dandy, but if you make little 3x5 cards and you stack up thousands of them in the office floor, they'll start taking notice.
All right, we still have like 10, 15 more minutes for comments. So if you've been thinking in your head about it, now's the time to line up here.
I probably have more questions than comments right now because I did my research. But I'm a wild one too. I grew up here in this valley. Okay, Marina, M-A-R-I-N-A, Weatherly, like the weather, L-Y. And I've grown up here riding in these mountains and hiking, and my children and now my grandchildren. And I agree with everything that's been said, so I won't repeat it. Just one thing, as far as timber harvesting, I think with our comments also, we need to lean into climate change and how we need our old growth trees and all these trees for carbon sequestration. How, you know, that's the whole conversation has kind of been dropped lately in the news and everything, but we need to keep bringing that up. That it's these trees that are lungs for this planet, and we do have some nice old growth trees in this area. The other thing is, I think we all need to do research on why they're doing this, what the why is. Is it for timber? Is it for mining? Is it for what? In listening to the last State of the Union address, there was our president was speaking to as if it was manifest destiny time. I don't know if any of you caught that, but it was the exact same language that they used in late 1840s, 50s, 30s, whenever that guy, what was his name? Monroe. Was it Monroe? See, I'm not prepared, I don't have my research, but it just hit me. I'm like, gosh, we haven't advanced at all. And it was like the West is ours for the taking and we need to explore new. And so I have this feeling that maybe this is what this is about. So I think we really have to ask why this is, and nail it down, and then let them know why it's not a good idea. So, but if we don't know what it is they're after, it's hard to respond with specifics. And we need to be specific and not each reason down. So, thank you very much.
Hey, good evening. I know many of you here. My name is George Korn. I've lived in Hamilton since 1981. And I've got a reading list to start with for you. I want to go over the fact that this roadless rule, though, has been here before I get to that for the last 25 years. It was enacted by Bill Clinton, and the reason it was enacted is because the Forest Service had made a disaster of our national forest all over the country. Right here in the county, Dale Burke, who wrote the clear-cut crisis that made national news in the mid-1970s. Dale grew up in northwest Montana, but he ended up in Stevensville. Get a copy of this book. You can Google it, The Clear-Cut Crisis. And you'll see one reason the roadless rule was needed. 4 things that the roadless rule does. Wildlife habitat, it protects, it gives us clean water, and climate resilience. Another important aspect, and that's just 3, I can't count, but I was stupid enough to end up in the infantry because I couldn't. But at any rate, the fiscal responsibility, when that rule was adopted, there was a backlog by the Forest Service, $8.4 million that they had tried to take care of every road that they had cut all over the country. It was a mess. So the wildlife habitat, our clean water, and climate resilience are critical reasons that we need to preserve this rule. The last thing I would ask on the reading list would be Eller's Koch. Ehlers was an old-time forester. He grew up, he was one of Pinchot's boys, so to speak. Came out here, he had actually grown up in Bozeman. And he talks about the Bitterroot in particular as being one of these places that needs to be preserved. And he was talking about the whole Bitterroot National Forest when he stood on a summit and looked around. So it's up to us now. We'll have to do what we can. And we need to turn out and we need to stay organized. And I'm glad to see everyone here. And thank you for the sponsors of this event.
All right, last call for comments.
My name is Wyatt Day. I was born in Hamilton and raised in Victor. I am a hunting guide. I've run trail crews. I do wildland firefighting, and I do invasive species control. And I've done a lot of work over here on the Forest Service spraying roads. It's a lot of weeds on those roads, and they're right next to them, 20 yards off the road. That's where our weeds come from, is from people driving. And we'd have a lot less problems and a lot less ecological devastation with less people driving around. In hunting season, I often dream, I'm usually over in 270 driving all these Easterners, flatlanders around on these back roads and just dreaming about a day where I won't see a vehicle at all back there. Iffy if that's going to happen, but at least we could keep some places from getting as full of roads and cars as we already have. I'll spare you guys the quotes from Edward Abbey about criticizing national parks and having roads in them, or Bud Moore lamenting about Highway 12 being put in. But the 20th century is full of quotes about our failures in conservation, and also a lot of learning about how our society can do better. Culminating in 2001 with the Roadless Rule. And here we are in 2026, and we're back fighting to defend public land instead of pursue rewilding and restoration. It's just really sad that we're still fighting to defend instead of to rewild. Thank you.
So my name is Sita Loveridge, and about 20 years ago we had enough roads in the National Forest to go to the moon and back 8 times. The last thing we need is more roads in our precious National Forests, and I'm another voice for rewilding.
Any final comments?
I have a question.
Okay.
Where do are the county commissioners fit into this discussion? Like, is it worthwhile to talk to them too and writing to them?
I'll let Hillary answer. Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, this is a federal public lands issue. The county commissioners are very influential voices in federal public land management. I have joked that they're the most important people in the West when it comes to managing our public land. So I do think it's well worth talking to your county commissioners. I imagine that, well, they will certainly have the opportunity to comment on the draft environmental impact statement that the Forest Service is publishing. I know that they talk with the local Bitterroot National Forest, managers as well. It's always helpful to talk to your county commissioners.
So we could actually arrange a public meeting with them, perhaps, if they're willing?
I hear that I don't live in the Bitterroot, I don't live in Bozeman, but I heard about the Sheep Creek meeting, and I think you could certainly ask that your commissioners hold a meeting to talk about the Roadless Rule as well. And of course, your Bitterroot National Forest plan revision will be coming up sometime soon. So that's another opportunity to be shaping the future of this forest, which you'll be hearing a lot about once that actually gets going.
Okay, great questions. So in closing, just a few next steps. We've touched on this, but the transcript and written comments from today will be submitted by Hillary during the comment period for the draft EIS expected in April. We still have the cards in the back if you'd like to get one to fill it out and leave it with us tonight. Also, let you know that we're holding additional public meetings. Tomorrow night will be in Butte, Thursday night in Bozeman, and Friday night in Helena. So if you have friends or family in those places, please invite them out. We have more information about our schedule for these meetings at that first website, roadlessrulemt.org. And that will be updated as this process continues with additional information about how to stay engaged on this process. Of course, there's the Forest Service website as well. That's the really long one. So that will have the most, I would say that's where it will first be posted when this comment period is open. So straight to the source there. If you have any additional questions about this, Hillary, who you've met, is available to answer your questions after, and she has her email up there as well. Just want to thank again our organizing partners for helping put this on. I know we have several of those people who spoke today in the comment period, but also who are just in the audience. So if you want to just wave your hand and invite people to speak to you after, you're welcome to do that. And yeah, that is all for tonight. Thank you all for coming, and good night.